Be Honest with Dr. Yana. Join me for honest conversations with experts, get practical advice that will help you to better navigate your relationships and empower you to create meaningful and lasting connections. Fridays on United Public Radio Network 107.7 FM. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are live on United Public Radio Network 107.7 FM. As usual, we are live on Be Honest with Dr. Yana. And today we have a great guest, Robert Mitchell. He was invited to share his fantastic story, and he is a wonderful person. He's also a psychologist. He's a master's in counseling psychologist from California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco. Over the past 30 years, he's worked with thousands of people from all walks of life in several healing modalities. So originally, he used astrology as a tool to demonstrate the structures of his clients' consciousness, which shaped their experience. And over time, he has become more interested in identifying the organizing intelligence behind each person's circumstances so that an ongoing dialogue could be created between his clients and that intelligence. Psychedelics, then used properly, can be, when used properly, can be a catalyzing agency in promoting this dialogue. So, welcome, Robert. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Somehow I have noticed that when I invite gentlemen onto the show to share their stories, they mainly shy away. And we see a lot when women share their stories. And of course, women can be more talkative and they're more empathetic, more emotional, and we do share our stories. And this has been my observation that men don't really do that. That they either hold it all inside, they try to solve it on their own. They have been taught to man up and not share all these problems, right? To solve it all on their own. So perhaps that is the case. But I've noticed that men have suffered, and a lot of my clients as well suffered from the hands of women in their lives. And I'm not pathologizing all women, of course, just like we're all human. But the stories that men hold, negative stories that they hold, they can be very destructive. And it takes character, it takes the hero's journey to get back to yourself, to come out. In fact, from that relationship with a person, to come back to relationship with yourself and come out as a hero.
Yeah. Well, I feel like being in a relationship that's really destructive, the responsibility lies with me. That's ultimately what I learned from the experience, was that I welcomed this into my life. And I didn't discriminate between what was okay and what was not okay. And I embraced my mistakes with enthusiasm. And I have to see that as some part of me that manifested from my unconscious that I had to learn about. But there was somebody involved with me who facilitated that. We did that together. And there's a lot of suffering involved. And there's a lot of circumstances in my life now that are a byproduct of those decisions.
Well, that is very admirable. And of course, in order for good change to happen in our lives, we have to go through some horrifying, horrible experiences. I know that you Originally, you were married in a very good marriage with a good, stable partner, your wife, and the fantastic children, and your life was stable. Everything was wonderful. And then one day, things started to go south. So, how did that happen?
Well, I was in a wonderful family. I did have a wonderful wife. I had amazing kids. I was in a community where our family was loved and respected. And I had sort of a very chaotic bohemian upbringing. And the family I created and the healthy marriage I had was, oops.
Oh,
Oh, what, have
I
I,
can hear you. No, everything is good. Uh huh.
okay. And that was sort of a constructed response to the family that I grew up in, and I
Mm-hmm.
was very proud of it. Like, it was a very conscious decision to marry a wonderful woman who was from a great family and was really loved and was really solid and was really intelligent. And about, I'm trying to think how far into the marriage it was, about 12 years into the marriage and about 16 years into the relationship, I began to have an affair with a woman who I met in yoga. And she was charismatic and beautiful, and sort of everything that got my dopamine shooting off in one person. And she was in a very unhappy marriage that she was very explicit about. And we began an affair that lasted for years. And ultimately, her marriage was going to come to an end anyway, because it had been a source of misery for her for a really long time. But it destroyed my marriage. It destroyed my relationship with my kids. And it destroyed a lot of relationships with friends in my community.
Well, first of all, if I may ask you, why did you choose to um, have that affair, as you call it? Why did you choose to have it? Because it's all by choice. What was lacking in your life?
Yeah, I don't know. It almost didn't feel like a choice. I feel like the way I see it in retrospect is I grew up in an environment, like I said, that was very chaotic and emotionally difficult. And I worked really hard, you know, doing therapy and getting graduate degrees in psychology and stuff like that. And it was almost like I I was I'd grown up with heroin addicts, and I relapsed 20 years later, after I'd gotten away from them. Like, I think the choice that I made was, it felt so familiar to me. It was the sort of person that my mother was, who was creative and chaotic and narcissistic and probably had a borderline personality. And it was exciting. And the monotony of being in a family that was functional was really foreign to me, because there had always been so much upset in my family growing up, emotional upset, that when somebody who constellated similar dynamics in them and brought similar dynamics into my relationship with them, it just seemed like mana. Like, it was irresistible. It was irresistible to be involved in a process with someone like that, who wasn't as um, moral as the wife I had, who hadn't lived a moral life, who had used drugs and done things that I just didn't approve of. But becoming involved with them just became kind of an obsession. And also, they were so assertive with me. They were so enthusiastic about becoming involved with me. They love bombed me from basically early on in the experience. And I just found it irresistible. I found it like a drug.
That is so interesting. Don't we all go into psychology in order to first fix ourselves and then start fixing
Yeah,
the world?
yeah,
Yeah, it's like the wounded healer
yeah,
aspect of our personalities.
yeah,
So you consciously chose to have a stable relationship, a stable family, and you facilitated that as well because you've been in your marriage for how long at the time when you met this
At the
woman?
time, I've been married for 12 years.
So 12
And
years, you
yeah,
had a good
I had a
relationship,
good marriage.
stable.
I
Yeah.
had a monogamous marriage. I had a good marriage. I was I had an incredible relationship with my boys. I had two boys, and I was always sort of like the coach of their soccer team and super empathetic to who they were and supportive, and spent a lot of time raising them and a lot of time uh, being generous with my time, because my father had died when I was 16, and I knew that he had given me a lot in my childhood, because he'd spent a lot of time fathering me, and so I knew the value of it. So I always spent an enormous amount of time with my kids, and I probably had a strong relationship as a father with my kids as anybody in the community that I was in, which was a lot of really successful people in Los Angeles who were successful in their careers and healthy people. And part of this, the person who I became involved with, their husband was not involved with their son at all. And in fact, one of the first things that she confided in me was that at school, the coaches didn't know who his father was. And I think that there was, I think part of relationships like this is there's a bit of envy. And in envy, jealousy is people wanting what you have, and envy is people wanting what you have and wanting you not to have it. And there was something diabolical in that, in the experience, that I didn't see until much later.
That is so interesting how you define the difference between jealousy and envy. To
Yeah,
me, those notions were synonymous, but it is so interesting to know that distinction.
yeah,
And that it happens when the person is envious. Of course, they don't want you to have that happiness, and they would do anything to destroy that, anything. And I know that so from the beginning that the everything was going well, and you consciously chose to have a good relationship. Otherwise, that you would have chosen the dysfunctional from the very beginning.
yeah.
And you did your best, and you survived up until the time when something familiar that came to you that disrupted that nice experience, something from your past, and she was very similar to your mother.
She was similar to my mother in that she was creative. She was really narcissistic. In fact, the way I met her was giving out um, she was giving out invitations to a show that she was in, and when I asked her what her medium was, 10 minutes later she told me her entire art career, and my thinking was, wow, she is beautiful and she's narcissistic as can be. And the other thing that I didn't really get a handle on was my mother was like a poly intoxicant user. She was like an everyday marijuana smoker. She drank. She sometimes, I think, took pills. And that was just something I was used to managing as a child. And this person had a drug history, which, like, I never would have married somebody who told me this, like, because it's all such red flags. They'd had a cocaine history. They'd smoked cigarettes, and my dad had died from lung cancer. So I probably smoked like 2 cigarettes my entire life. And I probably tried cocaine once in high school and went, oh, that's for people who don't really like themselves. And she was an everyday marijuana smoker. And I also have never used marijuana because I found it so distasteful and how it affected my mother's behavior and how unpredictable, and how I was always kind of having to fish for where she was at. So all these things came with her, which were all the things that were buried in my shadow, and I wouldn't have had for the mother of my kids. I wouldn't have trusted somebody like that to take care of my children. And I feel one of the great gifts to my sons is I chose such a good, wholesome, loving person as their mother. But when this person came and they constellated a lot of the same traits as my mother did, it was very intoxicating to me. And
But then again, But putting again, Robert, not necessarily that you went into that relationship thinking, "Oh, it is so similar to my mother
No.
that it is sounds so familiar and looks so familiar. Oh, let me do that." That was not the case. Like you said, it was all in the shadows.
Yeah.
And when we meet someone who is so similar to our uh, authoritative people in our childhood, for example, or in our youth or early adulthood, we tend to build also our relationship based on that pattern that we had before.
Yeah.
Unconsciously, we don't put parallel to that. But then again, it is good to ask yourself a question: what is happening there? But nevertheless, that when you just met that person, you were swept off your feet,
Yeah.
and it's very difficult to think rationally at the time because of the hormones playing, and
Yeah.
because of such an idealistic picture that was pictured there as well. And also, the person was very charming.
Oh,
So not everything went bad from the beginning, right? It was so
incredibly
charming.
charming, incredibly charismatic, incredibly beautiful. You know, like that was all part of it. You know, that was all part of the intoxication was, you know, and also really, really physically different from my mother. You know, like looked just completely different from my mother in that my mother was kind of a small, dark woman and she was tall and blonde and you know couldn't have been any physically different, but couldn't have been any kind of intrastructurally more similar, you know, and you know the healthy relationship, it was kind of more foreign to me, and I didn't get the kind of dopamine spikes that I got from being involved with this person that I knew was kind of marginalized in my experience and marginalized in the world, and the danger of being involved in that. There's a great book. It's called what's it called? It's written by an Italian Jungian analyst, and it's drugs, addiction, and initiation. His name's Luis Zola, I think is his name. And he says that drug addicts, part of the excitement of being a drug addict is part of being this part of this secret society that other people, straight people, don't know about. And that's part of the community of being a drug addict. And I felt like I was in this community suddenly where people did bad things that they knew were wrong and were immoral. And it was kind of exciting letting go of the the conventions that I had been living with, and of family and honesty and wholesomeness. You know, that was part of it, sadly.
And that is the precisely is the goal and the mechanism behind the seduction process that people are involved with. And of course, seduction, a lot of the times that it happens subconsciously, they're just the personalities of people that have the characteristics of better seduction than other people possess. But nevertheless, it can also be deliberate, but a lot of intentional actions taken. So, and as you mentioned now that it felt like a secret cult, right? And it's interesting to be a part of it because when this happens, and the part of the seductive process is also to provide to the person something that he or she is lacking. And if the person is completely stable in a nice relationship, but life is monotonous, he already has everything at certain age in his life, uh, that it's everything is figured out, but something is lacking, and they identify that. Like you said, it was. She was very charming and she knew, and the envy actually wanted to take you away from what you had and to bring it to yourself. And that happens. So we can
Yeah,
have
there were social circles I was in that she couldn't get into. There were schools that my kids were in that she couldn't get into. You know, I was just I was just experiencing life in it was in Los Angeles in a way that was unavailable to her, and I think she wanted into it. And whenever I was around her friends or I attended social events that she was part of, I always knew that this was not my social ring. This was not my social environment. It was a different one. And in ways, it felt lesser. And that created an enormous amount of conflict in me. It created an enormous amount of disease in me.
Well, and even nevertheless, when you felt that and you saw incongruities, something was wrong, that certainly did not ring the bells at the very beginning, because the intoxication, because the charm, because of the love bombing component. And it is not so easy to get away from that.
It was funny because I had a very sexual relationship, with ongoing sexual relationship with my kid's mom, that had been going on for 20 years, and it was still very vital. But this was like someone coming to my office and having sex with me. This was somebody having me in their studio, and having sex. This was someone coming to my house when my kids and my wife were away traveling, and there was just something about it that was, it had something extra. It had some kind of extra excitement to it that I know is complete pathology. And I sometimes think that maybe my parents had similar kinds of things going on, and I intuited that, and that felt like me to me, like I was getting to know something about them by behaving that way. Or that this was a way that people behaved that was foreign to me, and it was like foreign travel. It was like exciting. Like I think a lot of it was involving dopamine spikes, which I didn't really understand. Just like heroin or cocaine involves dopamine spikes. So like if I got a text from them and they said they were coming over, or I just got a text from them and they were telling me something, or it was a text planning something, it was an escape from the fundamentals of my life, which at that point had become very static. And another aspect of it that was part of my experience was I was getting to be the age that my father had died at. Like he had died when he was 45 from lung cancer, and I was approaching that age, and it felt like there was something ominous waiting for me, because I had been traumatized by his death at that age. And as I approached that age, it felt like something was happening that was worrisome. And this was one of the ways that I dealt with it.
You mentioned that not only that it felt like a cult, it was getting away from the life that it was before. And unfortunately, it is so easy for us to give in to the temptation, and we don't approach that moment consciously, and that can become a problem for us. So we are just swallowing that hook, that
Oh yeah.
fishing hook, that whatever bait is on that hook, doesn't matter how bitter it is, but most of the time it's sweet, and we just swallow it. But that hook stays inside and it's never getting out.
I didn't think at all. Like I would just have to say, I didn't think about what I was doing at all. I didn't, I'm somebody who thinks about things. I think about things in other people's lives. I think about things in my own life. And it was just like, there was no intellect involved in it. It was like I was kind of possessed by something, that was traumatized in me. And it seemed like some way to maybe fix that, or it seemed to hold out the possibility that there was some transformation through this new kind of relationship available to me. But it was so non-intellectual. It was like moving my hand off a hot stove. I didn't think about it once.
That is so interesting how that takes our guard away and makes it so difficult to even comprehend it consciously and critically. So, with that kind of relationship that we get involved with, not necessarily that we think it is so bad for us from the very beginning. Like you mentioned, that there was love bombing, there was complete um, idealistic picture. And the woman that you mentioned was gorgeous, drop dead gorgeous. And even if she was so unlike like your mother, but nevertheless, she was so beautiful that you decided that she was the love of your life.
Yeah, she was sort of, I don't know if she still would be, but she was sort of my physical ideal at that point in my life. She was tall and blonde and athletic. She was like a model, and I think except for her own insecurities, she could have been a really successful model. Like I think she had modeled at a certain point. She just found it so difficult because she was self-conscious about her appearance. And but it was like having a supermodel as a girlfriend, or as a lover. And
Mm.
there was sort of like a cultural ideal of that as well. And also my kid's mom was really beautiful. I remember seeing my kid's mom the first time and thinking she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. And I felt like I had some narcissistic fantasy about what it meant to be with some kind of cultural ideal. A woman that's tall and blonde and looks like a model, and everybody thinks that, oh, that says something about you. And I came to learn it doesn't say anything. Nobody's really interested. But I had some fantasy, maybe from growing up in Los Angeles,
Oh,
around
yeah.
the entertainment industry. My I there's a saying I wrote. My mother told me this. My mother was a very bright woman, but besides being incredibly difficult and a very difficult mother to have, but she said, glamour is the appearance of magic where none actually exists. That's actually the definition of glamour. And I would say that having grown up around that, having grown up around film stars and film directors and rock stars, glamour, and growing up in Malibu and places like that, glamour was something that I noticed. And there was something glamorous about this person because of how they appeared to other people that just it deepened my intoxication with the experience.
So essentially, you gave in to your narcissistic tendencies
Yeah, it was my
to
narcissism.
have that person in your life.
It was my narcissism 100%, because every decision that I made that had been a good decision, that had been a profound decision, that had been a thoughtful decision, was about my family and my marriage. You know,
But
and,
mhm.
and go ahead.
We must distinguish, of course, between people with narcissistic personality disorder and those with narcissistic traits. And we all have narcissistic
Yeah,
traits. If we say that, somebody comes to you and say that I'm not a narcissist, I don't have any narcissistic streak in me, those people would be lying,
yeah,
because we, as humans, we are narcissists from the moment that we are born, and craving the attention and asking and also manipulating our parents, and that's how we grow up. Nevertheless, some grow up into the healthy uh, human beings with healthy narcissistic traits, like uh, healthy self-love, and others can be very pathological. So
yeah.
some
I grew up
people.
in an environment where my father really loved me and really empathized with me. So I was able to have somewhat of a healthy sense of myself. And I had difficulties with my mom, but the person who I became involved with grew up in an environment where they weren't loved at all. And they were sent away to school very early, and they had an abusive that a parent who was physically abusive, and they had all this trauma from their childhood and from their early adulthood that was unaddressed, that was pretty open. And
And you knew this, and you knew this,
I
that,
was
and
told
she
about it.
also would
I was
be
the
playing a victim quite often, right?
Yeah, there was a way that this person saw themselves as a victim of their circumstances and talked about it a lot. Talked about their childhood, talked about their abusive parent, talked about being sent away to school and crying themselves to sleep and all that sort of stuff. And kind of felt like I'd had a soft, easy life because none of those things had happened to me. And like I said, when they talked that way, I could sense that they were envious of it. Like I had loving grandparents, that I was involved with, and I had been provided for. My education had been provided for by my grandparents, and which was incredibly generous and loving. And that person their family hadn't provided for their education, so they felt resentful of that. And I just think that was another thing that there was envy of, and part of the pathology between us. It was like saying, well, you've had this life where you had these advantages that I didn't have, but I can still wreck your life. And I think that was a lot of the energy in the relationship.
And also, that would make you feel guilty about what you have, and prompting the desire in you to share what you have and that person doesn't. And
Well, I
so,
shared I shared my parenting, because I was very generous with her kids. She introduced me to her kids maybe a month or two after I met her, and left her kids with me to look after them at some event because it was right around the corner from where I live for a few minutes. And I never introduced her to my kids, like not in the almost 12 years of the relationship, because I, I thought my kids knew what was going on and they didn't want to be involved with her. So I didn't demand it. But
well, there is a reason why they did not want to be involved, right?
yeah,
Or know her, and either also you knew. So, what was the time? What was the turning point when you finally realized that my savior tendencies that I developed with my mother,
yeah,
possibly having a borderline personality disorder,
certainly having a
also a
borderline.
narcissist and
Yeah,
destroying person, right?
yeah.
That the when did you realize that the that actually you're also tendency to be saving other
Well,
people
it's
that
it's
turned negative for you?
it was really interesting because my kid's mom was a really capable person and she wasn't damaged like her parents. I think one of the first things I did with her is I went to her parents' 50th anniversary party, and there were rows and rows and rows of family around, and she grew up in a very supportive environment. And I think that with this person, I realized, like, I felt kind of useless to my kid's mom in a way because she didn't need me to save her. She was capable. She made a great living. She was gifted. She'd won a Fulbright scholarship. She was Australian, and she'd won a Fulbright scholarship in the United States that was for foreign architects that 10,000 people had applied for. And so she was a great mom. She was organized. She just didn't really need that much from me. And this person, I remember early on, after about 18 to 24 months of our relationship, she began to formally divorce her husband. And when that happened, he was doing things like canceling her health insurance and buying other houses. And when that was happening, she would completely fall apart, like sobbing, and I'd have to drop everything that I did to go help her, to go meet her, to comfort her. And at that point, I knew that, like, it was costing me my own peace of mind. That was pretty early on, and costing me my own time to be supportive of her keeping it together. And also, what had happened was she wasn't actively using cocaine when I knew her. That was a story. But one night she went out with friends of hers and used cocaine, and she came back and she was so hungover the next day that she could barely function. And I don't think I'd ever seen anybody like that before in my life, like in that state. And at that point, I started to feel like, oh, I'm way too much caretaker. Like, I need to get out of this because I don't believe in this kind of dynamic between people. Like, that was something that happened pretty early on in the environment, in the relationship. But I think at that point I don't know if I'd moved out of my house, but I was so between two worlds, and I felt like if I got out of that world, that there was going to be real retribution from her. And when I finally did get out of it, there was. So I was right to think that, like there was just something, there was some kind of like sickle hanging over my head during the entire experience that I was
And
afraid.
then it finally fell. Then it finally
It finally
fell.
fell when I finally left. But I kind of feel like my mom was like that too. Like, ultimately, like, if she didn't get what she wanted, there was no length she wasn't willing to go to. There was no bottom to how she behaved to get what she wanted. So you just give it to her so she wouldn't act crazy. And I think that this person was similar. They were they had a similar character structure, that had a similar desperation.
Because there was like tantrums. They have
Yeah,
behavior similar to
yeah,
tantrums. When they want something, they will go, they will do everything in order to get it.
yeah. This,
The sad thing about this type of relationship that you had with your wife, and then you switched to this person, is that when you mentioned that she was such a good woman, right? And she
yeah,
did not
such
need
people.
to be saved.
No,
She was accomplished on her own and did
yeah,
not was psychologically healthy, physically healthy, and
yeah,
accomplished on her own. That is a very sad part because women like that, they do want good husbands, they do want also to be taken care of, not in the sense that you come and you rescue them, but as a good partner to
yeah,
also be there, to also have this close emotional and physical connection in a partnership. Nevertheless, I know it from my own personal experience, and I've met so many people in my life that would also make a statement, or also subconsciously would go to women who needed to be rescued.
yeah,
And the interesting thing is that when I was also dating, several men would not even consider the possibility of having a relationship because, as one of them stated, that if you were in a position that I would have to save you, just like that, that I would be there right away. But you don't need to be saved
yeah,
because you're accomplished, you're strong, you
yeah,
don't need anybody. And that is a sad part about it because having this savior complex does not make you a bad man. It actually, you have a good personality, you're a good man, and your attention went to a different object. And with that object, like if you mentioned that your mom possibly having the borderline personality disorder, it is very destructive. These people are very destructive. And
this
at the same
person,
time,
yeah, this person was so destructive in my life, financially, to my family, to my social environment. Like, so I lost so many friends because everybody was like, wow, Robert must have really gone crazy because he had like a great family and a great wife, and he just threw it all away. And people weren't that interested in being friends with me anymore because it was so atypical of the kinds of families and marriages that I was around. It was just stupid. Like, people thought it was stupid, and that there was no way to justify what I did.
and
And,
not only that, when you decided to finally put an end to that relationship, to that affair, like you said, she became very vengeful. And
oh,
she also spoke to your friends.
oh yeah, no, she definitely created a campaign against me. She did a number of things. I know she told me, when I left her, that excuse me, that she was going to decimate me. That was the word that she used. She said, I'm going to decimate you. And I know that she created a negative campaign against me. And she was always asking me for money. Once I left her, her sister got in touch with me, who I'd never spoken to in the 12 years that I was involved with her. I'd never spoken to her sister once. And her sister got in touch with me and became like this, I guess they call it a flying monkey, demanding that I give her money. And I think that her alimony was coming to an end right about the time that I left her. And I think she had a plan for me to take over support of her lifestyle because her husband's alimony was coming to an end after 10 years. So she made very large, uh, uh, money demands on me. That her sister told me that she was worried that she was suicidal and I needed to give her money. And I was, a couple months later, I started dating this other woman who, and they both got in touch with her. And got in touch with her and said, I'm trying, like, they would send messages and then erase them and say things like, I had STIs and I've never had an STI in my life. And they sent her a note saying that I told her that I'd had sex with several of my clients. And, to me, that's so predatory. It's like saying I told her I had sex with my children, like, things that were really illegal. And I went back to Los Angeles like once in 6 months, and there was I kept getting a bill from the tennis club that we just joined, that we both joined or were part of, that I'd already paid and told them I wasn't part of it anymore, and they kept sending it to me. And I went by the tennis club to discuss it with the manager in person, and she tried to take out a 5-year restraining order against me and demanded $60,000 in reparations. And you know, I have clients that I work with. I have people I'm in relationship with, intimately, and friends. I have publishers that I'm working with. If she took out a 5-year restraining order against me, it would totally destroy my life. And
And not only that, which is so crucial, not only that, but spreading the rumors that you have sex with your clients would have put an end to your career.
oh, I know that was what she was trying to do. And I know she said it to people, because she said it to, I have the note that she sent out. And, I said, I had a lawyer say, you better stop or I'm going to sue you, because it's libelous and it's defamatory. And I don't know if she has. I'm going to go back to Los Angeles at a certain point, and I'll figure out what's what with the whole thing. But she really tried to destroy me. And then when I got to court, I flew to Los Angeles and the judge, and she didn't even show up. She was appearing by Zoom, and she was like 5 miles away. And I flew from New York to address this. And she was she had no composure during the event. Like, I don't know if she was high or she didn't understand how court worked, but she didn't understand that she was going to be appearing in the court in front of everybody, saying what she said. She didn't understand that I was going to see the what she turned in as evidence against me. And she just completely lost her composure. And the judge apologized to me. Like, he said, how many days you've been in Los Angeles in the last 6 months? And I said 3. And he was like, and she took out a restraining order against you while you were here? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, did you see her? And I'm like, no. And she had lied and said I'd come by her house at night. And I had Tesla records, because I'd leased a Tesla, that would have shown I never went by her house at night, and it was so diabolical. I couldn't believe it. Like, she had begged to come to my mother's funeral because she wanted to participate in her memorial and in her business. And in the request for restraint, she wrote, my mother had a personality disorder, and so did I. After trying to be part of my mother's memorial, and coming to the funeral. It was so disorienting and frightening that somebody was that intent on destroying my life, because I no longer wanted to be with them. And
Well, that is the case, unfortunately, Robert, that many people find themselves in. Well, there are a lot of women talking the same experience that they had with their partners as men. Men don't talk about it, and it's absolutely crucial to understand that that can happen to men as much as it happens to women. And it's important to understand also the warning signs of that come at the very beginning, that those are the warning signs, like the drugs, unstable emotional states, so, right, like you mentioned, and jealousy, and unstable lives, and unstable
yeah,
previous relationships. And that's so important to understand that those are not just little innocent flowers. Those are the sign of much deeper problem, that we should be getting ourselves out of those situations.
yeah,
And that your description, and of course you have already done a lot of work on yourself, and it is not that you're trying to come out and uh, say anything negative about anyone, to go on a smear campaign like she did go against you. Um,
yeah, no,
for you is to also, like you said, to be a cautionary tale for other men, that it does really happen. And what would you say, um, if you had known originally that she had a borderline personality disorder and probably undiagnosed, because those things
Yeah,
are not
she
so
doesn't,
frequently diagnosed.
and also never really had gone into therapy, didn't believe in it, like hadn't really addressed it, had a lot of trauma, that she hadn't done any work on. So I think the way she dealt with it was, smoking marijuana and using cocaine and drinking and all that
And
sort of
that's
stuff.
what people do. That's what
Yeah,
people do. But all the signs that we need to get educated about is that why there are problems in my relationship. Start asking questions and actually pay attention to the signs. Like, for example, the suicidal ideations. Even if she wouldn't even go ahead and do what she said, that what she threatened to do, kill herself, and that's why to extort all this money from you,
yeah,
and not only 60,000. I know that her sister, like you shared before, asked for $150,000.
yeah. That's what they asked for. Her shit. They asked me for $150,000, and you know, the damage financially I did to my life because of this person is I'll never recover from it. If you want to talk about a cautionary tale, when I was, I think 45, I was already involved with them, and uh, I inherited an account from my grandfather who had died close to 30 years before, that had enough money in it to purchase a house in Los Angeles. And
And that, mind you, is not little money, because in Los Angeles, in
no,
Southern California,
no,
houses
no,
are
it was,
million and up.
yeah, no, it would have been a significant, it would have been a significant home. And because I was involved with her, and like what she wanted me to do when I had that money was rent a house separate from my home with my family so that we could hang out there. And I did that for a year. And if I'd invested the money I'd spent on that rent in Apple stock, that Apple stock would be worth like $1.5 million now. And my kid's mom was this incredible architect and production designer for film. And if I had just turned the money over to her and said, buy a house and fix it up and sell it, we could have split that money and it would have been a ton of money. Or we could be leasing that house now for significant income. And because I was in this state where I was in this fugue state, where I was just in this relationship and that was the priority, all of my decision making was bad. And that money just evaporated like footprints by the pool on a hot summer day. I made such bad decisions, because of this relationship I was in, that I almost feel like it's irredeemable in my life. Like I feel like that at times, that there's no way I'm going to be able to make up for that kind of morally or financially, or to my family or to my kids, or to my kid's mom. I other than to create some great success and share it with them. It's something I live with every day as a disastrous. It's like I said, if I was talking to you about the heroin habit I started when I was in my early 40s and kept going for 12 years, it couldn't have done any more damage than this relationship did. It couldn't have damaged my family. It couldn't have damaged my sense of myself, because I felt ashamed of what I'd done. I felt ashamed of how I behaved. And I think that I couldn't have done anything worse for myself, and I couldn't have found somebody worse to do it with. In the end, I realized I'd found the worst person to do it with. And, I'd probably internalize a bit of my mother's hostility towards me, her kind of psychotic rage or whatever it was. I'd internalize that. And then I found another person to express that towards me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we go to something that feels familiar to us. And that's why we stick with them for much longer, that we think that we should. And this is the reason sometimes that we don't even get out of it.
Oh, I, you know,
Um,
I stayed years. I stayed years longer than I knew that it was wrong. And I think that, I would have these moments of dread where I felt like I was being judged by something. And I didn't know if it was within me or out of me, that it was so wrong what I was doing. But it almost felt religious. Like it felt religious. It felt kind of eternal and Saturnian and profound and kind of biblical almost, that what I was doing was so wrong that I was always looking around and saying, this is so wrong what I'm doing. And, I guess I had a part of me that was broken, that had allowed myself to have that experience. And it was my fate to have it in this lifetime. It was a fated encounter. I don't see it any other way. And it's required a lot of healing. Like when it first ended, for months, the person was creating disorder in my life, and it was hard to relax, and it was hard to sleep, and it was super chaotic. It was super chaotic and super vindictive. Super, so much rage. So much rage was involved.
And with people with borderline personality disorder, that if you don't end the relationship with them on an amicable level, they do get into rage, they do get into this vindictive state, and they
Yeah,
damage you completely.
yeah,
So the reason also, it's very easy for us to say, oh, you should have gotten out earlier,
yeah.
right? Like you knew that it was wrong.
I
But
knew.
nevertheless, for so long, and you keep blaming yourself. And while I'm not taking off the responsibility of you, which you have taken already, you own your mistakes. Nevertheless, what happens is just as an explanation why we don't leave our abusive spouses, partners, whether women or men, especially also like with borderline personality disorder, with narcissistic personality disorder, very destructive, abusive partners, is that we know that things are wrong in our lives. We know, and we know that we need to be getting out of it, because that would lead us to utter and complete destruction. Nevertheless, if we love that person, we need to deal something, we need to figure out the way how to live with a person while still loving them, and understanding, reconciling our brains somehow with having this chaos in our lives. So what we do, we create an internal image of this person in our heads that is not so threatening, that is
Yeah,
loving, that
yeah,
is so sweet and
yeah.
understanding.
Yeah.
That's how we met them originally,
You know, I had
charismatic and sweet, and that's how we cope with it.
I had seen how she had behaved towards her ex-husband, who literally wouldn't acknowledge her if they were standing in the same room at their kid's school. Like, he wouldn't talk to her, he wouldn't have anything to do with her. And I saw the way that she was hostile to him. I saw the way she antagonized him. But I just thought that somehow I existed outside that realm of her consciousness, that I was different. And I know I'm not. I know I wasn't different, that I was ultimately disappointing. Ultimately, I couldn't heal her, and she realized that, and that made her really angry and really vindictive. And it makes me, all I can look at is my own stupidity. Is I'm a very intelligent person, but not all of me is intelligent, and probably the part that was making that decision was very kind of primal and childlike. And just trying to feel okay, and thinking that I was going to be able to transform this person once and for all, and make us both really happy. And it was
Well,
super immature and childish. And she every person I introduced her to, she triangulated in the relationship. And I just kept going, oh, okay, well, that's what
yes.
she does. And ending relationships that were 25 years long after she'd been involved with the friendship for like a year. And she was just so destructive and so unwell. And, that's who she was when I met her. I just went, oh, she's super tall and beautiful and blonde and charismatic. That's what I need. And
Well, while you think, Robert, while you think that you failed to heal that person that you really wanted to, we shouldn't also diminish the healing aspect of good relationship, because we do, in a relationship we bring healing to each other, right? Some people bring destruction to us, but in a proper relationship with a proper person, we bring healing to that person, and you were completely capable of bringing that healing. However, borderline personality disorder is a very difficultly treated
yeah,
disorder,
yeah,
and almost impossible, of course, that we deal with the symptoms, and the people can really uh, know the consequences to their actions, and try to understand what they have, and monitor and deal with their emotions. But nevertheless, if they think that they don't have it, and not that we say that, oh, she was diagnosed with it, but this kind of behavior very indicative of borderline, of the personality
yeah,
disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and there can be the whole number of disorders, and you could, but the thing is that not everything that could have been healed. And plus, as a psychologist, you also know that if somebody does not want to be healed, they
yeah,
will never be healed.
yeah. It's too hard for some people. Look, I think that ultimately some part of me really needed to be healed. And that's what this whole experience was about. And, once I got out of it, I immediately, I've been in therapy ever since because it was such a destructive part of me that took over my life that I really needed to work on. And I really needed to get to know, and I really needed to um, form a relationship with. And I feel like it's going to serve me for the rest of my life. And I think ultimately, my mother died a year ago at 89, and I don't think she was healed. I think she was the same person at 89 that she was at 39. And hopefully, I won't be like that. I won't be like that with my children. I won't be like that in the relationships that I'm in. And,
But if you understand it, Robert, you understood that already, that you were not that kind of a person. Nevertheless, what's dangerous about being in a relationship with a person who suffers from borderline personality disorder is that you become, also, they make you borderline, they make you
oh,
narcissistic, they
yeah,
destroy you.
yeah.
And that is a crucial thing to understand,
It made
because,
me feel so crazy.
oh, yeah.
And like sometimes I would just I would strike out feeling so crazy, like in ways I'd never behaved in my whole life, and I was in my mid 50s,
And then
and
you start doubting yourself, like, what's
yeah,
wrong with me? Maybe that's my problem.
and that's one of the things I said to the judge. I said I'm 54 years old, and this is the first time I've ever been in a courtroom, and my kid's mom, who had been with me for 20 years, was going to testify that there hadn't been a second in the 20 years where she'd felt afraid of me. The person I was in a relationship with was going to say the same, and it was just, but this person, they'd lie all the time, they'd go see people, they had a coterie of kind of married men around them who they had do things for them. Not that they were being sexual with them, but they would let them have the fantasy like, oh, if only life had been different, things would have worked out between us, and just always having men do things for her. And then when I'd ask her about it, she'd say, no, I didn't do that. And I'd see like the phone messages where she had done that, lied all the time. And, it was always trying to use her appearance to get what she wanted, because her hard work wasn't getting that for her. And so it was so diabolical. When I look back at it, it was the most diabolical. At least I knew there were parts of my mom that were diabolical. Like I knew they were diabolical just intuitively, pretty much as a child, because she'd had abuse in her background. But the how diabolical this person was, I didn't find out until the relationship was over. I didn't find out just how much damage they would like to purposely do to me. Um, and I think that when people are borderline, that's their threat, is that they'll destroy you if they don't get what they want. That's the implicit threat So you have
Yeah,
to.
and unfortunately, they suffer from that themselves, and they live with this excruciating pain of this raw emotions all the time, unable to regulate themselves, and it's very sad. Nevertheless, when it comes to us and to people around them, when they destroy everyone literally, then that becomes a problem. Of course, that if they don't want to go to therapists, one thing, but then people around, children, partners, parents can be destroyed.
Yeah.
So,
She had a child who was in so much trouble all the time, who was smoking marijuana at a really young age, who was getting arrested, and like was in so much trouble because of the parenting situation. And I remember she had found his marijuana stash at a certain point and had smoked it with him as a, I don't know, as some kind of camaraderie or something when he was 14. And I just thought, like, wow, that's what a crazy decision that was. That was the worst parenting, worst authoritative kind of
yes.
a parent could do. Like, what terrible judgment. And then I just realized that terrible judgment got involved with me, who was married and had kids and, had a life that had nothing to do with them. And, but my judgment was just as bad because I allowed it.
But nevertheless, you got out of it. And all
Yeah.
those aspects, of course, I know that so many people, so many men will be able to relate to your experience
One thing,
because
one
it
thing
is
I'd
quite
say,
ubiquitous.
one of the things I'd say to the men out there is, I was planning to leave it for a long time. I was taking steps to leave the relationship for a long time. Like, I had all this stuff in storage that I was shipping to New York City, planning my escape. And what I'd say to men who are in relationships with like that is, don't delay. Don't delay. I remember I got in a couple car accidents before I left, and it was because I wasn't leaving. And I knew that if I didn't leave, worse things were going to happen. They weren't major, but that, my unconscious was creating problems for me because I
Absolutely.
wasn't being accountable to it. I had, I think, 2 car accidents in the last 6 months in Los Angeles because I wasn't leaving. I wasn't leaving fast enough. And like, leave fast. When you see it, it's real. It's not a glimpse into something. It's the thing that you're seeing. And if it's a shiny object, if it's beautiful, it doesn't matter. Get away from that person. Get away and preserve yourself, preserve your family, preserve your finances, preserve your standing in your community. Get away and preserve your life. That's the thing that I would say is the most important thing.
And if it is something too good to be true, it is 100% the case. This is not true. If it is too good to be true, it is not.
It's too
So,
good to be true. It's this
yeah,
person was so attractive and was so obsessed with their appearance, like the imperfections in their appearance, which were so minimal, but that's all they saw. And
well,
they
that's
would
also
distorted self-image.
the yeah. So it's so difficult to speak to the psychologist as well because
I
you
know.
already know what it is, right? It's
It's like
yeah,
we're fencing. We're
yeah,
fencing.
right, right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
And
we
it
both
is,
know.
but
We
but
both
it's
know.
also as soon as we realize what is happening in our life, that something is wrong, and then we start digging and finding answers, we do start to operate with this kind of concepts. We understand them, and in order to get healed, we first must understand why it happened to us. Why
Yeah.
did we go through that?
Why we happen to it, I'd even say.
Exactly.
Why we happen to the circumstance. And I think that's the only way to heal, is feel like I happened to this. I happened to this situation. It didn't happen to me. I wasn't a victim.
Absolutely.
I was the facilitator of it.
And while all these men, for example, who are not coming out, who are still suffering, and good men as well, who are suffering in such relationships, your advice is so great to get out of it because it is not going to get better.
It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. It's the impact on you is going to be greater. Like, if that person had been able to take out that restraining order, if the judge hadn't dismissed it and apologized to me for having to return to Los Angeles to address it, he apologized to me about it.
Imagine the judge apologized to
He
you.
apologized to me. He said, "I'm sorry you had to come here for this, because there'd been nothing that had been done that was like
Yeah.
dangerous." Um, But, and it was funny because when I was in the courtroom, I felt like there was order in the courtroom, and he saw, and I was safe. but I didn't feel safe before then. And if that had been allowed to go through, if I hadn't addressed it properly, if I hadn't responded to everything that she said in an articulate and measured and intelligent way, that could have gone through and my life would be destroyed. And that was her goal. Her goal was to make it so I couldn't work, so I couldn't have relationships, so I couldn't publish, and you know, the goal was to destroy me. And to me, in the end, that's really what the whole relationship was. Like, that threat was implicit in the whole relationship. And it's a lot of the reason that I didn't leave. And the men who are watching this need to know that they can't be controlled by that. They need to act on their own behalf as soon as they can, as soon as they realize that they're in danger.
That is a perfect advice. I love this advice. We, in fact, the show is over. In fact, we're out of time. But I wanted to mention something before we go today is that the interesting transpersonal thing happened at the time your mom died. You broke your relationship with this woman right on the day your mom died.
Oh, yeah. Do you want me to tell the story quickly, or do you just want to stick?
No, we are going to leave that
Oh, yeah.
story
The day my
for
mom
July
died.
19th.
Okay, I'll tell that story on July 19th. But yeah,
Yes.
the same day my mom died was the same day this relationship came to a final end. 100%.
And that was a profound time in your life and
Yeah.
so healing. And you understood so much about it. And we are going to talk about it on the 19th.
Okay.
So, ladies and gentlemen, while we are out of time today, Robert will be back with us on July 19th for this incredible continuation of the story. And you wouldn't want to miss it. So please join us on July 19th on Friday, as always, on Be Honest with Dr. Yana on United Public Radio Network 107.7 FM. Well, for today, Robert, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your incredible story.
Thank you, Dr.
That
Yana.
is,
I enjoyed it was very healing telling you that story.
it is going to be exemplary for many people out there and also healing.
Mm.
So we will see you
All right.
on the 19th. And everyone, have a fantastic rest of your day and see you next Friday. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.